Hello and welcome to the channel. As always, like the video, and if you enjoyed the story, leave a comment on if you would want more. This fan fiction was not created by me, but in the description there is a link to the fanfic so you can show your support to the creator and read along. Without any more delay, let's dive into the story.
Things had been quiet for the past few days, without even a gruesome death or a string of especially bad luck to liven things up. Mineta had been enjoying his break to the fullest. Every breath was wonderful, and even classes seemed less boring than usual. There was just one thing which was out of the ordinary. Bakugo kept staring at him. Staring as if annoyed and confused and furious all at once, his crimson eyes piercing and his mouth twisted into a scowl of frustration. He constantly rapped his finger against his desk, or tapped his foot on the ground, as if the storm of questions in his head were leaking out in his movements. He'd even stopped bullying Izuku as much, opting to ignore his childhood victim while his attention was so diverted. It wasn't the worst thing Mineta could imagine Bakugo doing, but it was distracting. Every time he looked up, it seemed like Bakugo's angry scowl was looking back at him. He would have asked what his problem was. Really? If he hadn't been afraid it would result in him being blown up. Or eviscerated. Or otherwise maimed, beaten, exploded, or murdered. Mineta's annoyance was not worth getting killed over. And so, he ignored Bakugo as much as he could, pretending the spiky-haired blonde was a gorgeous tsundere woman staring at him with erotic frustration instead to pass the time, until one day he looked up to see Bakugo standing in front of his desk. Mineta jumped. He couldn't help himself. Bakugo held his bag carelessly over one shoulder with a single hand, glaring down at the tiny boy. "Have I killed you yet?" Mineta was already shaking his head as he answered, his heart pounding like a jackrabbit's. "And no?" "TCH," Bakugo said, turning away without another word, leaving Mineta staring after him with confused terror. It was quiet until a few days later, until just after a particularly grueling training regimen, when Bakugo appeared in front of him again. "How about now?" Bakugo demanded, scowling ferociously at the grape hero. "Have I killed you?" "No." Mineta answered, and Bakugo glowered as he stalked away, kicking a garbage can over as he went. Mineta closed the door of his locker later that day to find Bakugo glaring at him from behind it. "How about now?" the explosive hero snarled, frowning with annoyance. "Look, I'll tell you when you kill me." Mineta burst back. "Promise me," Bakugo deadpanned, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. "And if you don't, I'll annihilate you." "Fine, I promise." Mineta said shrilly, and the explosion hero walked away with a final glare. Mineta yelled at his back. "Why do you want to know, anyways? Are you the devil?" Bakugo didn't respond, leaving Mineta staring after him with a confused mix of emotions in his tiny heart. Despite his promise, Bakugo seemed to become more and more tense as the days went by, especially after hearing the stories of Mineta's deaths by the hands of 4 second-year students with elemental quirks. But Mineta didn't have time to worry about him, especially after he lost all his sparring matches in a single day. He booked a training room, already annoyed at the loss of his free time, and Ida promised to train with him. In retrospect, Mineta shouldn't have been so surprised when he opened the door to see Bakugo instead of their class rep, his arms folded and a grin of anticipation on his face. It was late enough in the day that the training room was empty, including the battle arena in the center of the equipment and seating. Of course, Mineta automatically tried to leave, but the doorknob snapped off in his tiny hands, leaving him trapped. "Your bad luck gets worse when you're in danger," Bakugo called out behind him, standing on the battle arena in his full hero costume. "And the Jinx will actively prevent your rescue by others." As if on cue, the security cameras smoked and hissed. The flat-screen monitors went fuzzy with static as their video source was cut off. It was just bad luck that the security guard watching the monitors happened to fall asleep a few moments prior. Just bad luck that the training room wasn't being used by other heroes at that exact moment, despite the busy school. Bakugo grinned as Mineta slowly turned to look at him with shaking knees and wide eyes, his expression downright demonic. "You wanted to spar, didn't you, tiny grapes? Bring it on." Fire bloomed in his palm, and he empathized his final words by hurling a weight at Mineta with the full force of his quirk. It tore through the air like a hulking, 20-pound bullet, and crushed itself into a flat plate against the wall above Mineta's head. If he hadn't ducked on reflex, with a totally manly shriek, Mineta might have. "Come on!" Bakugo shouted, his vivid red eyes alight with battle fever. "Use your quirk. Try to defeat me. Give me everything you've got, and die screaming." With explosions snarling in his palms, Bakugo surged forward, the flares of light from his crackling explosive power reflecting in Mineta's terrified eyes. "With him in the air like that, I can't stick him to the ground." Mineta realized in a panic, throwing sticky balls anyways, forcing Bakugo to dodge to either side as he advanced. "He's gonna blow me up. I knew it, I just knew it." Bakugo's next explosion slammed against the ground, hurling him in the air above Mineta's final, desperate barrage of balls. Two more explosions in quick succession changed his momentum forward, then back down at Mineta diagonally, his palm outstretched with sparking nitroglycerin gathering in his hand. The death he expected never came, as something struck Bakugo bodily from the side. Mineta looked up from his huddled spot on the ground, uncovering his eyes. Izuku Midoriya breathed hard, his fist still outstretched, odd power surging and sparking around his body. "Kaken, I thought you might try something like this, but I hoped I was wrong. When I heard you ask Ida to take his place in sparring, I knew I had to see for myself. I'd been waiting here since class ended." He straightened, his normally calm eyes shining with hurt and betrayal. "Why, Kaken? Even if he's cursed, Mineta is still our classmate. Why are you trying to kill him?" Bakugo picked himself up from the rack of weights his back had slammed into, spitting blood to the side disdainfully. Despite the pain the blow must have caused, his rough voice betrayed no discomfort. "What are you talking about? I'm the traitor. Can't you tell?" Explosions blossomed between his palms and he shot forward, his fist striking the place Izuku's head had been. The green-haired hero dodged with such speed Mineta could barely follow it, but Bakugo didn't give him time to counter, flying just out of reach. "No!" Midoriya shouted, his fist creaking as he clenched his muscles. "Your eyes, Kaken, your eyes aren't gold." He blocked Bakugo's explosive punch with his crossed arms, his feet skidding back a few inches on the ground. His eyes went wide as Bakugo's other fist shot towards his face, and Izuku rolled to the side, pushing off with enhanced strength as he straightened to counter with his own right-handed punch in a flash. Bakugo's power exploded down, the explosive strike sending him safely upwards while searing his opponent below him in the same move. "What does it matter, you damn nerd?" Bakugo snarled, baring his teeth as he smiled, the constant explosions casting stark shadows along the angles of his face. "He'll come back to life anyways. No one will remember this but him, not even the school. What does it matter if I kill him?" His words were a howl over the double-handed explosion he fired at the green-haired boy, and Mineta, behind him. Midoriya only had a second to react. He dove towards the wall, snatching Mineta with one arm, and pushed off the wall with both legs with all his strength. He cried out as the explosion burned his lower legs, his speed just too slow to carry them to safety entirely. His heroic rescue seemed to make Bakugo more furious. "Why are you protecting him? He's scum. Biojinx cursed him for a reason. He'll probably grow up to be a villain someday. Unless this curse gets bad enough that he's willing to try and change, he's just going to continue to be scum. The only villain I see here is you, Kaken." Midoriya howled, setting Mineta down as he blocked an explosion with a nearby table, the metal shining red-hot as it absorbed the blow. They seemed more interested in fighting each other than in Mineta. He scooted to the side, and scrambled behind some exercise equipment, hardly daring to believe his good luck. Hopefully they would beat each other down, and Mineta wouldn't have to do a single thing. He hid and waited, and shrieked as another weight crashed into his hiding place, sending the machine skidding back against the floor. A bar slammed into Mineta's head before it settled, and shining sparks flew in front of his vision dizzily, his head ringing like a drum. He heard Midoriya cry out with pain, and Bakugo's victorious shout. "Mineta!" Izuku called out, his echoing voice cutting through the haze of the Grape Hero's mind. And then, no, Kakin, don't. An explosion roared, a crash echoed around the room, and when Mineta looked up, he saw Izuku standing in front of him, his arms outstretched and smoking, with a stunned Bakugo staring at him through his mask. How had he moved so quickly? Mineta gaped, wondering if he was just confused because of his concussion. Surely Midoriya hadn't been able to cross the room in the blink of an eye. You can't. Izuku gasped, his torso burned and bare. He's still our classmate. You can't kill him for no reason. Bakugo didn't attack right away, his voice shaking with fury. You fucking nerd, everything you do pisses me off. Just once, can't you see things my way? Just once, can't you stop being such a pathetic weakling? Midoriya smiled. It was a sad smile, resigned and without much hope. I can't do it, Kakin. Even if he deserves it. Even if he has it coming somehow. I could never. He stopped. Stopped mid-sentence, his arms falling to his sides. And power surged under his skin like living lightning, so powerful the air around him hummed with strength, and when he tilted his head back to look at Mineta, his golden eyes were bright with hatred. In the same second, the same instant, he tore the heavy exercise machine away from Mineta like it weighed nothing at all, exposing the concussed hero on the ground. Bakugo looked like fucking Christmas had come early. Like it was the best day of his life. Oh, hell yes, he shouted, as Deku's super-powered fist surged towards the ground, shattering the concrete into a crater of destroyed rock, making the terrain nearly impossible for Mineta to evade them on. Finally, he shouted, his predatory grin widening as explosions roared behind him, and his legs snapped Mineta's head to the side with 2 consecutive kicks. Mineta knew he should fight back, knew he was actually in trouble now, but his head was muzzy, and his limbs wouldn't respond right away. His ears rang, and he tasted blood. Midoriya's punch shattered his ribs like matchsticks, and he surged backwards like a bullet, only to be struck by Bakugo's explosive, destructive power from behind, which shot him back towards Deku. Catch, you damn nerd! Bakugo howled, clearly enjoying himself. One for all. Midoriya shouted, his muscles creaking as his clenched fist shone with power. 100%. His fist connected with Mineta's stomach, and it was like every bone in his body shattered at once. Maybe they did. Mineta couldn't even scream as his back hit the ruined floor with meteoric power. But when he looked up, Bakugo was above him, his twin grenade gauntlets shining with bloody light. Die, you damn extra, he shouted, and a hellish explosion of fire rained down on him with a burst of gold and scarlet, the heat so intense Mineta's shattered bones were seared black before they disintegrated into dust. Black smoke filled the destroyed room, swirling over the destroyed floor, which featured a brand new crater of molten hot rock with an ashen smear in the center. Bakugo laughed, clutching his stomach. Izuku shook his head, touching his forehead faintly as the gold faded from his eyes. Kakin! What happened here? You fucking killed Mineta, that's what happened, Bakugo snorted through his laughter. Punched him to oblivion. That might be the first useful thing you've ever done. Izuku looked down at his shattered arm, which did indeed look like it had destroyed Mineta. Panic sparked through his eyes, and his voice went high with shock. But I didn't mean to. I must have been the traitor, right? Oh no, what would All Might say? And if I killed him, where did all this smoke come from? Bakugo didn't answer. He was still laughing when the current reality faded, whispering back into a possibility. Disco lights flashed and reflected on the surface of the scarred ice skating rink in a dizzying array of colors, as the hero grape juice skated for his life. The acrid tang of bitter acid burned cold in the air. Mineta had never been a strong skater, but today he was very motivated not to fall. Stream of acid ate away the ice to his right, and Mineta screamed, as a few stray drops ate through his pant leg. Curls of smoke and steam rose from the ice as the acid bubbled and ate through the surface. The heavy beat of the electronic song above pulsed, in time with the bursts of laser lights in the skating rink. I just wanted to watch you skate. Mineta shouted, knowing it was useless, as the pink-skinned girl glided behind him, closer and closer with every passing second. I wasn't planning anything dirty, honest. Which was mostly true. When Mineta first heard the acid hero loved skating on her day off, and, even better, had an upcoming competition she was renting the rink to practice for after hours in the local recreation center, he'd immediately made plans to spy. All it had taken was hiding in the bleachers after the skating rink closed to the public with his camera, but then, of course, the bleachers had happened to break during Mina's disco performance, revealing his location. He'd already had the skates on, since he'd had to rent them to get into the bleachers of the rink in the first place, with his shoes left as collateral. Acid had sealed the edges of the exit shut in no time. The Jinx had naturally activated, and now a smiling Mina was skating after him with gold glinting through the black scara of her eyes, looking absolutely gorgeous in her lilac and teal camouflage uniform, her arms and shoulders bare and glinting in the fantastic array of lights. Acid hissed hungrily from the ends of her long fingers, pocking the ice with tiny, steaming craters in her wake. She was so much faster than he was. She skated directly to his side, seeming to float and glide above the ice, a stream of pink acid shooting from her right palm. She banked, turning in a large circle, her spray of acid creating a steaming barrier he couldn't possibly skate across. Mineta's arms pinwheeled, and he barely stopped before hitting the acid line, but Mina never paused, whirling in a large, graceful circle with her acid never abating, until they were trapped in the center of an arena with steaming edges. Mineta struggled to keep his balance while standing still, throwing 3 sticky grapes at the skating hero without falling over. Her graceful hands snapped out in a flash, eating the grapes down to goo with a pinpoint stream of acid. It wasn't the first time he'd tried to trap her, but her quirk cancelled his out far too well, even without Biojinx's curse. Mina laughed, her white teeth glinting as she threw back her head, having the time of her life. Her feet shifted and wove together as she moved, making her complicated skating look effortless and graceful all at once. The beat of the song thrummed through the air. The shining facets of the silver disco ball cast fantastical patterns on the ice below, as lights pulsed and danced in a rainbow of whirling spotlights. She whirled faster, one hand spraying acid at the edge of their arena, making their ice circle smaller and smaller, while she fired quick bursts at Mineta with the other, forcing him to keep moving and stay off balance. "You're gonna run out of ice too, you know," Mineta shouted, and crashed down, a stream of acid he hadn't seen melting the blades off his skates. He hit the ice hard, the chemical cold stinging his palms. In a flash, Mina broke formation, surging directly towards him with liquid grace. He had a grape in his hand ready to throw, but instead of attacking him, Mina leapt, high into the air. Acid streamed from her rosy fingertips like a hose, as she whirled in circle in midair, her acid whirling in an ever smaller wheel, melting the entire circle of ice below her to molten slag, with grape juice in the center of it all. He screamed as the ice collapsed beneath his feet, dissolving into a quagmire of chemicals and acidic slush, eating him away bit by bit at the center. The music rose to a fever pitch, and Mina landed on the acidic swirl, her skates dissolving near instantly. Acid streamed from her bare feet, and she surfed a quick whirl around the sinking pit of ice and acid, spraying the trapped Mineta directly with both hands as the disco ball flashed directly above them. When Mineta's screams faded and choked away, the Ridley hero, Pinky, leapt gracefully from the whirl of melted ice with bits of Mineta, landing on the edge of her circle of destruction, bowing to imaginary fans with a laugh on her lips and a smile on her face. "O Father who art in heaven, please grant me the strength to purge this evil from the earth," Ibra prayed, her pale hands clasped together, with her head bowed in reverence. Locks of her thorny hair slipped over her shoulder, basking in the shifting rays of sunlight filtering through the whispering leaves of the training forest. She lifted her face to the light, her dark green eyes shot with gold slipping closed with pleasure as she basked in the light, an expression of pure bliss on her beautiful features. She wore a white robe of simple, cascading fabric, like the holy robes of a priestess. The snaking tendrils of her hair shot out, waving and curling as they grew into a living tangle of thorns, catching several sticky grapes in midair. The tendrils of vines entangled with the balls detached themselves, falling harmlessly to the ground. Mineta gritted his teeth, wondering what another hero would do in his situation. Ibera turned her gaze towards him, stretching out her hand imperiously, and a tide of cruel thorns whipped towards the tiny hero. "Grape rush!" Mineta shouted, throwing an armful of grapes into the tangle, buying himself a little time as the vines stuck together, writhing and snapping until sap dripped to the earth. The grapes fell to the ground, entangled in broken bit of vines, and more came, never-ending and unstoppable. Run, Mineta decided. Another hero would run. But not him. You think I'd leave here without rescuing my most important people? Mineta shouted, rallying for another strike. I'll never abandon them, you hear me? Eat my balls, plant freak. Ibera had lured him to the forest, after taking her hostages. If he'd told the teachers, she would have already sacrificed them. Mineta would never let that happen. Such wickedness, Ibera murmured sadly, placing a hand over her heart with a pained expression. You would fight so hard for such filth? She touched the leather satchel at her waist as she spoke. It must have been heavenly intervention which sent you to me, so I could cleanse your impurities with divine power. The bag contained his 12 terabyte drives filled with porn, of course. Those actresses are more important to me than my own family. Mineta yelled, his little brain working furiously on a strategy to snatch the bag and run. Do you know how much work it was to gather all that content? How much time? I'll die before I let you destroy those videos. Then perish, Ibera Shiozaki said calmly, her eyes imperious beneath her crown of thorns. Via Dolorosa, she called out, her voice a prayer to the heavens, and vines snaked over the ground, covering everything in sight in a thick layer of thorns. Mineta tried to run. The vines were far too fast, tangling his legs until he crashed to the ground. In a flash, the vines grew up his legs and torso towards his arms. I won't go down so easily. Mineta howled, with just enough time to throw more balls towards the overpowered Ibera. Faith's shield. Ibera shouted, lifting her hand to summon a wall of thorns to protect her, which detached from her hair to form a powerful defense. More balls struck the defense, but it was no use. The encroaching vines bound Mineta's arms to either side on the spike of thorns, until he was suspended in midair on a cross. Ibera stepped out from behind her shield. Let the sins of the unworthy be baptized in your holy light. She prayed, her hand clasped in an entreaty to the heavens. Hey! Mineta shouted, struggling as the thorns tightened around his wrists, cutting into his skin until blood dripped from the wicked edges of the spiked vines. The vines never stopped growing, curling around his throat and forehead like barbed wire, the pressure growing tighter with every second. Oh, Father, carry this soul to its final destination, in the fiery pits of damnation. Ibera prayed with heartfelt fervor, as sunlight cast a halo of light on her angelic white robes, and glinted in her thorned hair, both beautiful and cruel. The cross of thorns thrust into the air, as vines encircled Mineta until he was entirely hidden from view under the mass of pulsing plant life. Red seeped from the cracks between vines, oozing down the cross. Ultimate divine move. Ibera cried out, slamming her hand together with a crack. Crucifixion. The vines condensed, crushing themselves together into a tiny ball with a terrible snapping crunch. Few drops of blood stained the hem of Ibera's pure white robes. She knelt on the ground in the sun-soaked clearing, breathing a sigh of relief. She stood, radiating serenity, as her vines retreated, until her long hair was back to normal. Judgment has been carried out. The evil is no more. She turned to walk away, not looking at the crushed body behind her, her work complete. It started with a completely innocent comment no one could possibly blame him for. You should have seen this girl at the strip club, Mineta simpered, his eyes glazed as he daydreamed of the encounter. She looked exactly like Yayorozu. Dude, how'd you get in a strip club anyways? Kaminari asked, making a valid point. You're underage. I have my ways, Mineta bragged, leaning back in his chair. Class was long over, but a few pockets of students remained in the class to chat or look over their assignments. Course, even though the girls were stripping, some of them wore more than Yayorozu does in her hero costume. Todoroki stood, his book snapping closed with a little more force than necessary. He looked down at Mineta with cold, mismatched eyes. You shouldn't speak with such disrespect towards your classmates. Clean up your act, or you'll never make it as a hero. With that said, he let, as if the air itself were tainted with Mineta's presence. Mineta didn't care. TCH. What's that guy's problem? So, how hot was this girl? Kaminari asked, leaning forward with a half grin for more details, and Mineta gladly launched into the tale. But unbeknownst to him, another boy was watching, with faint disgust on his plain features. Mineta didn't notice, barely even registering the other boy's presence in the class, caught up in his exaggerated tale of the girl who looked like Momo. He didn't notice the boy passing by when Mineta sneakily took a photo of a girl's panties after she tripped painfully in the hallways, without bothering to help her. In fact, Mineta didn't notice the boy at all, until his voice echoed through the boiler rooms when Mineta thought he was alone. "You're not a good person," Hantashiro said, his voice echoing oddly in the steaming room. He didn't look happy, a frown on his features, as though weighed down by a terrible problem. Mineta swore, struggling to cover the box of stolen gym shorts he hadn't dared to hide in his room. "Hey, what, were you following me?" he demanded incredulously, as if Shiro were the one at fault. "Talk about creepy, don't you have anything better to do?" Tape shot from Shiro's oddly shaped elbow joints, whirling around Mineta in a vice trap, slamming him backwards so gym shorts flew all over the concrete. "I mean, you're a really awful little slimeball. Even your motivations for being a hero are bad. You're just obsessed with boobs. How is it fair that you get to be taught in the same class as the people who really want to make a difference in this world? The people who honestly want to protect their loved ones and make the streets safer, huh? Hey, my motivations are just as good as yours." Mineta protested, struggling against the tape. He should have been used to random attacks by now, but it never really got easier. "You think your tape can stop me? This is nowhere near as sticky as my grapes." Already, the tape was beginning to loosen a little with his struggles, as the glue lost its viscosity. "Like a weakling like you could kill me. Your quirk doesn't have any real power." Hantashiro lifted both his elbows, firing streamers of tape towards Mineta, binding him like spider silk. His eyes sparked with gold, but somehow, there seemed to be less of it than with the others. "I can increase the stickiness and power of my tape," he admitted, striding forward, and for the first time, Mineta noticed the unremarkable boy was actually extremely tall and well-built. His shoulder muscles rippled as he flexed, tearing the tape off with a snap. "But you're right. My abilities aren't suited for death. Normally, that is." He stepped forward, unwinding a length of glossy tape from his elbow joint, slowly and carefully. He stuck the tape over Mineta's mouth and nose, cutting off his air supply with terrible finality. Mineta struggled, unable to breathe, the tape so strong it was practically welded to his skin. "I left your eyes uncovered," Shiro said, with the air of someone who has planned their next move thoroughly. He stood, walking over to the large metal manhole cover in the corner of the room, dragging the struggling Mineta with him. "I want you to see. I've been waiting, until you came down here. Do you remember your cleaning punishments? I heard you had to clean the sewers. Did you know, no one ever bothered to get rid of those mutated crocodiles?" His eyes went wide with horror. Renewing his struggles did nothing, as Shiro lifted the cover, and stuck another length of tape to Mineta's bound back. He pushed Mineta into the dark pit without hesitation, the spool of tape unwinding for a good, long while, before snapping into place so Mineta hung over the infested sludge below on a bungee cord. Shiro tossed a flare into the pit, where it struck the walkway far below, and shone with brilliant white fire. Metal screeched as Shiro lifted the cover back into place, leaving Mineta alone. In the filthy sludge below, movement caught Mineta's eyes as he struggled futilely, his lungs on fire and his arms bound. I stared up at him, dozens of hungry eyes, gleaming in the light as sinuous forms curled through the water, their details obscured. One of the smaller crocodiles leapt first, only 10 feet long, its snapping jaws filled with actual shards of crystal instead of teeth, only to fall short bare inches from Mineta's scalp. Another leapt, emboldened by the first crocodile, a fiery red specimen who was rotting and melting like wax, whose teeth burned like cold fire when they tore off Mineta's foot. He couldn't scream through the tape, as more and more crocodiles surfaced, drawn by his struggles, the shining flare, and the dripping blood. They leapt with unnatural strength, some clinging onto him for several long seconds as they twisted their jaws to tear off bits of him, scaled monsters with mutated features. Scaly Head broke free of the water below, larger than most vehicles, fixing on the dangling boy with slitted green eyes. The mutated crocodile hissed, steam pulsing from the cracks in its scales, which shone with crimson light. The smaller crocodiles fled, disappearing into the sewers in a flash, leaving their mostly dead prize above. The enormous crocodile reared up in the water, bearing a mouth filled with thousands of teeth and rose all the way down the thing's throat, so large it could have eaten your average car, and ate what was left of Mineta whole, before disappearing into the sewers with finality. Mineta dragged his heels as he walked down the sidewalk dejectedly. Of all the rotten luck with partners, he muttered under his breath. I just had to get this guy. Keep up, Mineta, we've got a large perimeter to patrol. Tenya Ida called out brightly from in front of him, his power walking pace never faltering. Ah, can't you just feel it? The sunlight, the smell of the streets of this is hero work. As much as I enjoy class studies, and the theoretical aspects of strategies and mathematical calculations of average force and velocity, there's nothing quite as invigorating as a real day in the field. He laughed, waving energetically to a young boy who gaped in awe of his flashy set of armor. How can you feel the sunlight in that outfit? Mineta grumbled snidely. This assignment sucks. We're just patrolling the safest area of town. We'll be lucky if we run into any trouble at all. I'm never gonna get super rich and famous with assignments like this. Ida's voice took on a disapproving tone. You shouldn't be so concerned with the glamorous aspects of hero work just yet. We are still students after all, so even more mundane experiences such as this one have significant value in raising our overall experience and practical skill, such as teaching us the value of hard work and vigilance even in the face of apparent calm, since we need to be aware that evil could strike at any moment, and Mineta had stopped listening a while ago, but that didn't stop Ida from talking. Where is Biojinx when you need her? The grape hero thought irritably, wishing he were dead as Ida launched into an explanation of crime statistics in urban settings. Kill me, Mineta grumbled out loud, depressed at the thought of the next 3 hours of patrolling with Ida. As you wish. A smoky voice purred through his mind, and he smelled jasmine and sage on the wind. Mineta nearly fell over, squeaking in a completely dignified fashion that in no way resembled a dying balloon animal. And his eyes went wide, because he recognized the horned silhouette standing in the mouth of the alley across the street, purple mist billowing around her ankles, from her clawed hands to those gleaming violet eyes. She was here. She was here. Ida! Mineta shouted, clutching his class rep's hand urgently. Ida, that's her. Biojinx. We have to dash. Villain! Ida shouted, his voice echoing oddly in his armored helmet, as his hand closed around the nape of Mineta's tiny cape. You'll pay for what you've done. Recipro burst. Engine screamed in a high-pitched, mechanical whine, as power exploded from the exhaust mufflers in Ida's cabs. They shot forward like a bullet, wind howling around their passage, and Mineta's body lurched with the sudden force of their acceleration, his words torn away. Biojinx smiled as Ingenium surged past her alley, baring her rows of needled black teeth, gesturing dismissively with her hand, and smoke whirled from Mineta's skin, casting a long plume behind their screaming speed like a jet engine's exhaust. As Ingenium hurtled towards the edge of a brick wall, Mineta held out to the side, establishing a save point just in time for Recipro to reach full speed. Mineta splat against the brick wall, as Ingenium surged unharmed past the corner, in a moment of pure agony that only lasted a fraction of a second. Smoke whirled, and Mineta was abruptly back in Ingenium's grasp, and splat! No! Mineta realized, exploding against the brick 3 times in quick succession, agony shattering through his mind. Ida was only the traitor once. Splat, splat, splat. But he can't slow down in time. Mineta crunched against the bricks, his head breaking with a wet thwack. Their speed was so incredible. There was only 2 seconds between his deaths and the new save point. Splat, 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 splat. Would he be here forever, Mineta wondered? Blood splattered up the wall as Ingenium surged past. If Mineta didn't do something, he'd never get out. In the time it took to complete the thought, he'd already died 9 more times. After his next death, he snatched at a ball on his head, but he wasn't quite fast enough. His arms shattered against the brick. Little faster the next time, and 3 times after that he managed to throw a ball. It stuck to the ground, and Ingenium stepped over it in a stroke of bad luck. Mineta howled with frustration, trying again, and again, and again, hearing faint laughter in the back of his mind. Tenya Ida finally stepped on the sticky grape, stopping his momentum like he'd hit a wall. Mineta flew out of his grasp like a bullet, and splat against the wall anyways. Grape Juice sobbed inwardly, trying desperately to escape again and again, but it was hours later that he finally was set free. Ingenium hit his grape at an angle, and Mineta was thrown just past the brick wall, his arm scraping against the rough corner. He tumbled and spun across the concrete, and narrowly avoided being crushed by a car. Mineta! Ida called out behind him with horror. Oh no, what have I done? I was the traitor, wasn't I? Let me assist you. He struggled with the grape sticking him to the ground, and a screeching whistle stopped him. Hold it right there, a grouchy-looking beat cop said, flashing his badge. He had long, floppy ears like a beagle. All speed-type quirk users must obey the posted speed limit on the roads unless in the case of a villain attack. You know the rules. But, I was under the curse of a villainous monster who turns friends into mindless killing machines so she can eat the lifespan of select individuals for her own dark purposes. Ida protested, gaping. Sure you were, the cop snorted, flipping open his ticket book. What's your quirk ID number? No. Mineta protested, struggling to get to his hands and knees. Biojinx. She's going to get away. With sudden determination, Mineta found the strength to stand, bolting towards the alleyway, which was further away than he remembered it. His legs were like jelly, and even though it felt like he was moving through mud after being trapped in the speed of Recipro's death loop, he never stopped running. But the alley was empty, with a tall concrete wall closing it off on the other end. The last whispers of mist were already fading in the breeze. Mineta crumpled to his knees, shuddering from head to toe, and took a few minutes just to breathe. She was right there, she was so close. Biojinx had vanished without a trace. As if she'd never existed at all. Oh. Patrolling ended early. The class rep listened carefully to Mineta's story as they walked back towards campus. You say I killed you hundreds of times? But how? Isn't the traitor usually different people? Usually, Mineta grumbled, holding his aching arm. But sometimes it'll be the same person, 3, or even 4 times in a row. But you tried to slow down most of the time, so I think it was only the first time with you. If you hadn't been going so fast. I see, Ida said thoughtfully, glancing down at Mineta. And in the wake of this latest spree of dying, have you changed your mind about trying to break your jinx by giving up your bad habits? No, of course not. Mineta responded grumpily. But when I see Biojinx next, she'll face the wrath of Mineta, just you watch. It was unfortunate that Ida's helmet concealed his eyes from view. His engines roared with power, as Ingenium shifted his weight on one foot, and kicked Mineta's chin with the full force of a speeding train, ripping off his tiny head like a soccer ball. It soared into the sky, winking as it disappeared from view. Mineta's headless body collapsed to the ground, and Ida stared. No, not again, he shouted, grabbing his head with both hands in panic. What would my brother say? I'm sorry, Mineta, I didn't mean it, and believe me when I say I would never knowingly dash. Reality faded before his rant was finished. But as smoke whirled and wind chimes sang, it took Mineta a moment to realize he had bigger problems. As he reappeared in Ingenium's grasp, splatting against the brick wall with agonizing reminiscence. Nu, he shouted into the void, the scent of incense and his own blood thick in the air. Static crackled on the old TV set in the musty motel room, distorting the tinny voice of the reporter. This footage was accidentally transmitted to the U.A homepage, featuring an incident with a peeping Tom within the school. While the school has faced heavy criticism, the student in question, Minoru Mineta, has not been expelled, due to unidentified extenuating circumstances. Nonetheless, many have wondered if this incident might cast a glance into the value system of U.A, and have expressed concerns about the quality of the next generation of heroes. In addition to this incident, our reporters have uncovered footage from a previous training session, where the same student states his motivations for becoming a hero are, quote, "so girls will let him touch their bodies." The school has not confirmed the authenticity of the disturbing tape, choosing not to comment. Next up, a recent jailbreak has released Kaizo Makaguro, more commonly known as the hero killer, Stain. This notorious murderer was able to escape due to what appears to be a string of bad luck, although officials are looking into the possibility of an accomplice. Heroes are advised to exercise caution in the field, as his current whereabouts are unknown. The hero killer stared at the TV set, though he was no longer paying attention to the report. He hunched forward on the musty motel couch, as the glow of a street lamp filtered through the small, yellowed window, scowling at his own mugshot. His knuckles cracked as his fingers tightened around the cheap armrest, the wood straining under the pressure, filled with horrible, murderous rage. Was this the type of hero being groomed to take care of society? Mineta's face seemed to swim in front of Stain's vision, slack-jawed and pitiable, the dazed expression on his face suggesting lewd thoughts. U.A had to know what kind of person he was. By failing to expel him, they proved their corruption. As if to say trash like Minoru Mineta was still capable of passing their tests, and entering the prestigious ranks of the heroes as a perverted narcissist whose only goals were self-serving and immoral. Rage shot white-hot sparks over his vision, and Kaizo gritted his teeth so hard they creaked. Sparks flew and glass shattered around his thrown combat knife, breaking off the narration of the news report, and Stain stared at his own reflection on the shattered TV set, breathing hard. No. It was unacceptable. For the sake of the future of heroes, to prove to society once and for all that scum should never be idealized under the banner of false power and popularity. The target has been identified, the hero killer, Stain said, his voice a rasp of hate, the dying sparks of the TV shining in his blood-red eyes. Oh. It was the end of a long day for Mineta, but he was pleased as he walked the dusky streets towards U.A, his shopping bag filled with DVDs and small boxes. "I can't believe I got the deluxe sexy female All Might figurine," he gloated inwardly, clutching a little tighter at the plastic bag with his sweating hands. "I'd like to give her the Manchester smash, e-ho-hoo." Silence hung over the city like a shroud, broken only by the sound of Mineta's footsteps on the rough pavement. He'd taken to wearing his hero uniform every time he left the school, to show off his coolness and strike up conversation with the ladies. His majestic cape fluttered in the wind. One day, when he'd hit his growth spurt, he would have more girls than he knew what to do with. Cold wind blew, rattling the plastic bag, and 2 DVDs from the overstuffed bag clattered to the pavement. Mineta scowled, crouching down to pick them up. He carefully inspected the dust covers for scratches which would impair their collector's value, and sighed with relief when he found none. "Well, Mineta, I guess this is your lucky day," the grape hero said to himself, tucking the adult films back in the bag carefully. He walked past a darkened crack between buildings, whistling smugly to himself. Katana flashed, drawing a burning line off agony across his legs. DVDs clattered to the ground as Mineta fell, the tendons in his thighs severed and useless. Blood pooled on the streets, growing by the second. Heavy boot kicked him over, and ground into his throat to muffle his screams. Mineta's voice choked off, as he looked up at the dark silhouette of his attacker, his vision blurring at the edges. The man stood dark in front of the moonlit sky, standing in an odd, hunched position, his arms hanging low to his sides. He wore plain dark clothes, though his arms were bound with bandages, and a scarlet scarf trailing torn edges to the ground. The tattered bandages of his rough-hewn mask fluttered behind the hero killer, as he shifted the katana in his calloused hands, staring at Mineta with hungry bloodlust. Student or child, hero or the elderly, it makes no difference, the unworthy must be purged, like the blight on society that they are. Stain said with ominous sincerity, bringing his katana up to his long tongue, grimacing at the taste of Mineta's blood. "Even you, child, are not free of your obligations. You who seeks to take up the mantle of a hero without pure intent, you who represent the corruption within the values of U.A, the top school of heroes, have you made peace with your gods, you filth? Paralysis struck Mineta with the beat of his heart, his muscles frozen and useless. Wetness stained his pants, and blood pooled ever larger around his tiny body. He could only stare as Kaizo Makaguro stared down at him in the night, his blood dripping off the chipped blade of his wicked sword. Stain crouched down, leaning in closer to bare his tombstone teeth in a smile, his deranged eyes staring at Mineta with anticipation. The gaping hole where his nose had once been was just visible beneath his tattered white mask. When your corpse is found, just outside the school that was supposed to protect you, bloodied and savaged by a monster, perhaps then the world will see just how unworthy you truly were. His arm flashed as he spoke, driving his combat knife deep into the muscles of Mineta's shoulder. He couldn't scream through the paralysis, though he certainly tried. Stain reached for his belt, drawing another knife, and stabbing it deep into Mineta's other arm. He struggled inwardly, but it made no difference. Stain held his katana in both hands, cleaving a fine cut from Mineta's throat down to his stomach, slow and torturous. Blood bubbled from Mineta's lips as he struggled weakly, his heart spasming and jerking with strain. The unworthy must be purged, Stain declared, staring impassively at Mineta's fatally wounded body. You should have died before being allowed to breathe the same air as All Might. It's only fitting that you should perish on the streets like the filth that you are. Mineta's vision hazed over, and when it cleared, Stain was already gone, vanished into the night. He couldn't move. He could barely breathe, the paralysis preventing anything but the shallowest of breaths. He was starting to get cold, though the night was warm, and why hadn't Stain just cut his throat and been done with it? He vaguely remembered hearing a civilian scream, sometime later, but by then he was too far gone, his body too destroyed to even open his eyes anymore. When the wind chimes of Biojinx's curse sang, he was pathetically grateful as he slipped into smoke. Sparkling lasers cast dark shadows on the trimmed rose bushes and delicate wrought iron tables in the indoor atrium, as Minoru Mineta tried desperately to find an exit. Aoyama laughed, thrusting his stomach out as short bursts of glittering lasers filled the air. You cannot hide forever, petit raisins. Don't be afraid, with that special armor you're wearing, my full-strength laser won't hurt you. It will merely shine like the light of 1,000 glorious suns, in an effervescent rainbow of unfiltered fabulousness. I must see it. I'm not wearing special armor, you twinkle-headed fruitcake. Mineta yelled, as he leapt over a rose bush to avoid a laser. Are you even listening to me? Why yes, my twinkling armor is special. Aoyama laughed, flipping his hair fabulously. The shining hero, Can't Stop Twinkling, was decked out in his full, and not at all over-the-top hero costume, with chivalrous medieval armor which gleams silver in the light, fantastic scarlet sunglasses shaped like the outstretched wings of a bird of paradise, and a glittering, royal purple cape which shone like 1,000 diamonds. The lasers were dangerous, but Aoyama was also stuck to the ground in the middle of the atrium with a trio of sticky grapes. He could fire in nearly every direction, by using his shoulder and knee emitters, making it difficult for Mineta to maneuver, but he was rather well motivated. Aoyama twisted his torso as best he could, firing another naval laser at Mineta. It seared just to the side of him, not quite far enough over, tearing a blackened hole through the gorgeous rose bushes. You are a slippery one. Aoyama scolded good-naturedly, as grape juice hid somewhere behind him. But my sparkle cannot be dulled so easily. Naval laser. He bent over backwards, firing a shining white laser from his shoulders, and Mineta shrieked as the tops of the balls on his head were burned clean off. Oh, you, Aoyama laughed, as if Mineta were a naughty child for dodging his laser beam of death. Mineta finally made it to the doors, which were stuck. His face twisted with ugly frustration. Biojinx, you bitch. He whirled, every muscle tense as he looked in the general direction of Aoyama, although the rose bushes hid him from view. He can't reach me from here, if I just wait until help shows up. Glass shattered and tinkled down from above as a full-power laser punched a hole in the ceiling. Where are you, petit raisins? The game cannot end so easily. Come to me, and I'll show you the power of my special move, the art of seduction. I don't want to hear that from a dude. Mineta despaired inwardly, hunkering down by a white gazebo covered with trailing vines and snowy blossoms. The only ones allowed to give sexy nicknames to special attacks should be girls. He cowered as another laser burst boomed through the atrium. For a long moment, it was silent. Another minute later, and Mineta cautiously crawled from his hiding place. Had he given up? Mineta rarely escaped from the traitors. Maybe this time, he'd really be just fine. He looked up, directly into the blue gemstone laser of Aoyama's famed sparkle belt, which shone and glittered with inner fire as the gem changed to brilliant white. Ultimate move. Aoyama declared, striking a pose like a true gentleman, his glorious sparkle boots still stuck to the ground in the middle of the atrium. Naval laser buffet. White-hot lasers exploded from his shoulders, knees, and stomach, glittering with rainbow sparkles, striking Mineta dead on in a burst of pure, over-the-top, extravagance. Rose petals rained from the gazebo as it was torn to kindling, and at that moment, a fine mist of sprinklers turned on, casting glorious rainbows in the light of Aoyama's laser beam of death, as Minoru Mineta was vaporized to shining dust. When Mineta interned for untimely, he'd learned the true face of evil. He'd thought the opportunity would be a fantasy wonderland, complete with a budding romance and his own eventual team-up with the biggest cup-sized girl in the business. But no. Untimely had ruined his perception of heroes, and convinced him that women were lying attention seekers with no actual interest in sleeping with the fans they flirted with through the camera. On screen, she was a gorgeous powerhouse who loved to play up to the eyes, but the truth was far more horrible. When untimely wasn't on the job, she acted like a normal person. And a lazy one at that. Pick up more chips, intern, vacuum the floor, intern. As if he was nothing more than a lowly servant. Her gorgeous persona in public was just a means to an end. In private, she didn't flip her hair and bite her lip seductively, or sashay her hips just enough to catch the eye. Mineta reacted with absolute horror the time she had actually burped a little bit, while watching her own battle reruns on TV. Yes, Mineta decided. Women were evil. If the gorgeous image they portrayed in videos was a lie, he didn't know a thing about them in real life. He didn't want to know. What was so wrong with living in a world where women only existed to please their admirers day in and day out? Them having bodily functions and realistic emotions wasn't something he wanted to deal with. Untimely had proven herself to be a real person, destroying the fantasy version of herself he'd created in his head, and he despised her for that. It was only fair that she compensate him for the trouble he'd experienced, whether she knew about it or not. And so, the hero Grape Juice found himself huddled on the rooftop of an abandoned storefront, his new camera held in cold fingers as he waited for the opportunity to get sexy photos of the gigantification hero. Her hero office was nearby, there had been villain attacks in the area recently, and he had every hope of seeing her in action. For 3 hours he waited, listening to the sounds of the city, until finally, he heard an explosion. Mineta snapped to attention, his fingers ready on the camera trigger. Civilians screamed below, and 3 more explosions rocked the downtown city in quick succession. Grape Juice waited, ignoring the distant cries for help. Any minute now. It took 7 minutes for reports of the attack to reach untimely, and for her to arrive on the scene in all her voluptuous glory, driving the leader of the robotic guerrilla villains into the ground with her signature flying kick, the Canyon Cannon. He was lucky. The attack was only a block away from his location, it was nothing his zoom function couldn't compensate for. Mineta drooled as he snapped photographs of the curve of her spine, her sexy hips, even a few hot shots of her feet and ankles. Familiar face flashed through his camera lens, and Mineta swore, ducking beneath the ledge of the building. Eraserhead? What was he doing here? Swearing echoed over the battlefield, along with the clap of more explosions, and Mineta remembered. Aizawa-sensei was taking small groups of students on patrols to assist other pro-heroes for a class assignment. Mineta's turn wasn't for 5 days. Stealthily, Mineta packed up his bag, glad he was so far away from the battle. Their teacher was still angry with him for the shower incident, and if he discovered Mineta taking sensual photographs of another woman without her permission, well, Biojinx wouldn't need to be involved for him to be killed without mercy. His bag held on his shoulder, Mineta sneakily climbed down the line of grapes on the side of the building, landing on the ground below. He flinched, going rigid with shock as a student was blown across the street by a powerful punch from the villainous robots, right in front of his position beside the building. For a brief moment, Mineta locked eyes with Katsuki Bakugo, surprise flashing over both their features, and then the explosive hero flew out of sight, only to return to the battle with a roar of fury. Mineta breathed a sigh of relief. Even if he'd seen the bag, Bakugo couldn't have known there was a camera inside. Which meant Aizawa-sensei would never know either. He turned away quickly to make his escape when a dark shadow fell over him. He looked up just in time to see Lady's heel smashing towards his face, crushing him into the dirt like an ant. She reeled, cracking part of the abandoned store as she recovered from the powerful blow. Meanwhile, Kamui Woods managed to subdue the last of the villains with a binding forest attack. "Oh!" Lady cried out, looking down with horror which quickly turned to relief when she saw the building was the empty store. "My manager would never forgive me if I destroyed another building," she said, sighing with relief, unaware of the crushed grape beneath her heel. "I'm glad I didn't break anything important." Bakugo howled with laughter, ignoring the odd stares of his teacher and two classmates, barely able to breathe. "I love her," he snickered, his expression downright demonic. "Biojinx is fucking awesome. Did you see that? He got squished like a grape. Serves him right, the tiny little creep. Don't worry, old lady, you didn't break anything important." Lady's eyes flashed with anger at being called old lady, her lips pursing into a pout, but before she could retaliate, reality faded, Bakugo laughing without inhibition the whole time. "Ahahaha, what's this? Class A students can't even afford the deluxe spicy soba bowl combo? You inferior humans must despise scrounging for subpar food, when over at Class B we dine on the deluxe bowls every day," crowed the obnoxious Monoma, his condescension levels reaching near critical levels as he pointed laughingly at his fellow students. Unfortunately for him, Shoto Todoroki was not so easy to provoke. The cool-headed hero spared him a glance. "I like cold soba," he said by way of explanation. Kirishima nodded in affirmation at the next table, speaking up around a mouthful of red-hot noodles. Class A was used to Monoma's antics, and paid him no mind. "It's true, man, it's practically all he eats." Monoma didn't miss a beat, his voice rising higher until nearly everyone in the lunchroom could hear him. "Indulging in your favorite food? How frivolous. Class A students don't have any self-discipline. WAT Class B know that to be a true hero, self-sacrifice is a necessity dash." His eye rolled back, and he slumped to the ground, revealing his ginger-haired classmate, Itsuka Kendo, her hand still in the chopping position. She brushed her spiky ponytail to the side, sighing with resignation. "Sorry about him," she apologized, flashing an easy smile to Todoroki. "He just doesn't know when to tone things down." "I think you mean he's got a bucket full of screws loose," Kirishima snorted, to the general agreement of the boys at his table. "He's not all bad," Kendo said with an affectionate sigh, looking at the boy she just knocked out cold with a single blow. "I guess the competitive aspects of the school just brings out the worst in him, sometimes. He's really pretty smart, when he's not being a total tool." Todoroki looked at Kendo oddly, blinking his mismatched eyes. "Is something wrong?" Kendo said, a little self-consciously. "You really are the big sister of Class B," Todoroki said by way of explanation. "I'd heard the nickname before, but now I see why. You remind me strongly of my own sister." Kendo flushed, immediately defensive, though not entirely displeased. No, I just keep an eye on people, that's all. I really wish I had a different nickname, truth be told. It's not that I don't like the title, but maybe something more in line with my heroic aspirations or strength would be nice." Kirishima seemed to understand, grinning widely to expose his pointed teeth. "Something manly, huh? How about Kendo the Crusher, or the Ultimate Kendo?" As if summoned, Minoru Mineta popped up over the side of the nearby table divider, his perverted intensity shining like the sun. "If you don't want to be the big sister, how about the sex symbol of Class B? You've got the boobs for it, even if your ass is a little lacking." His shout just happened to fall in a quiet moment in the cafeteria, when everyone was already paying attention thanks to Monoma's rant and subsequent knockout. What little conversation there was died out, as the students stared at Itsuka Kendo for her reaction. She stared at Mineta in open shock, and used to being treated with such blatant disrespect, stunned into momentary inaction. And then her green eyes narrowed dangerously, her quirk activating in an instant. What happened next would go down in a history forever. Itsuka Kendo drew back her hand, which was already larger than Mineta's entire body thanks to her limited gigantification, and slapped him so hard wind blew from the point of impact, and the unfortunate pervert careened across the cafeteria like a bullet, colliding with the ground several times before slamming ominously into the wall. Students stared. It was like the entire school held their breath all at once. Kirishima spoke first. "Kendo of the ultimate bitch slap," he said, his voice hushed with reverence. Other students took up the title, whispering it amongst themselves, and a new title for the big sister of Class B was born as Mineta lay drooling on the floor. Oh. Principal Nizu set down the papers he'd been holding, steepling his tiny paws as he appraised the two students sitting across from his desk. "Well, while Mineta's injuries are unfortunate, I'm afraid there's nothing the school can do, since the security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned, and none of the students saw the incident." "That's ridiculous, the entire cafeteria was watching." Mineta wailed, covered in bandages and sporting two black eyes from face planting into the wall. The entire left side of his face was red. "Don't tell me no one saw." Indeed, many students had been called in to relay their version of events from the incident, but all of them claimed they hadn't seen anything, and couldn't tell who had hit Mineta into the wall. "I understand your frustration, but look on the bright side. At least you didn't die," Principal Nizu said brightly, no doubt chalking the entire incident up to a side effect of his curse. "You should consider yourself quite fortunate things weren't any worse. You two are dismissed." Muttering to himself the whole way, Mineta left the room, resisting the urge to kick over the trash can. Kendo sighed with relief, and looked back at the principal. "Is this really okay?" she asked anxiously. "I mean, you have nothing to be concerned about, Miss Kendo," the principal cut her off smoothly. "There are circumstances surrounding Mineta which are far from normal. I'm sure any momentary lapse in judgment on your part was not of your doing. That being said, please try to avoid a repetition of this incident." "Unusual circumstances?" "Right. Thank you, sir," Kendo said, bowing sharply in the martial arts style, before making her exit. She wondered what kind of circumstances the principal could be talking about. She hadn't noticed anything particularly strange. She was so caught up in her thoughts, she didn't notice that the students she passed went quiet when they saw her, whispering to themselves as she passed. "That's Kendo of the ultimate bitch slap. She's a legend. I heard Mineta's face imprint is still in the wall." Mineta was decidedly unpopular after his shower incident, which only boosted Kendo's appeal even further for taking action against the tiny pervert. For months to come, students went quiet with awe when they saw her walking, because Kendo of the ultimate bitch slap had passed.
That's it for today. Remember to show your support to the creator of this story if you enjoyed it. If you would like more parts of the story to be uploaded, leave a comment and subscribe to get notified when the story continues. Bye-bye for now, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day.